not only the final piece of their healing journey because they felt like they were on the other side of the event that had happened to them and now they're helping people, but
Mhm.
like they felt empowered because they knew that this story was going to do something. That their story now wasn't just this bad thing in their life, it was empowerment to help other people.
Like a
That
catalyst
the
for change.
catalyst for other thing. One of
So
the people who participated went on to get her PhD in trauma-informed work and is now doing trauma-informed offices and employ like for business, right?
welcome to Whole by Design, the podcast exploring the human experience with compassion and curiosity. Together, we'll uncover powerful internal resources and tools to help you embrace clarity, joy, and your full potential because you are whole by design. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Julie Lopez, and I'm your host for Whole by Design. On this episode, we will be diving into the power of storytelling and specifically how you can use storytelling to heal instead of harm. Today, I'd like to welcome Emmy Award-winning Taylor Kampia, who is also the founder and CEO of Make a Scene Media, where she does not only runs the business, but is an expert photographer, videographer with a background in television, and is using her interest in trauma-informed practice to really use storytelling for good on the planet. Stay until the end, where she is going to share with you her go-to 4 R's for making sure that you are also using your storytelling for healing instead of harm. Thank you so much for joining us today, Taylor.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, we want to have you here because we are all about the trauma-informed paradigm, and it really got me excited to read some of your materials and some of the work you're doing as a servant on the planet, trying to do good with nonprofits to spread healing, but very specifically empowering not just people in the media, but nonprofits and businesses, people in sales, people using stories to really slow down, think about, and start to incorporate sound trauma-informed practices so that these stories, while maybe in intention, are being told to do good, to inspire, and all this stuff, but are really 360 degrees consideration of all the people involved in making that story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started grabbing onto that niche in particular as someone with a background in television?
Yeah, that's usually the first question I get, which is like from people when I tell them that I do trauma-informed video production. There's sort of like a question. Oops, sorry. There's sort of a question mark that goes across their face where it's like trauma-informed video production. Like I understand trauma-informed, I understand video production. How do those things go together? And aren't you just using buzzwords right now? And I actually really appreciate that question because I do feel like being trauma informed is something that a lot of people are talking about, which I don't think makes it a buzzword. I think that makes it awesome because the more we talk about being trauma informed, the more we can actually be trauma informed. So, yes. So
And
to kind
I love that. I love that.
Right, exactly. So like just to get you to kind of catch you up to here to today. But basically, yeah, I started out creating television shows for networks like Discovery Channel, National Geographic, History Channel. I got to work on some really, really cool, fun cable network TV shows. Everything from like survival shows in Alaska to like swamp shows in Florida to wedding dress shows. And it's a super fun job. But, if you watch any of that kind of television, you know that people's stories are not necessarily presented in maybe what would necessarily be the most realistic light. Really the reality TV industry or the cable TV industry is about sensationalizing stories. It's about taking stories
Mhm.
and making and kind of like blowing them up. And the purpose of that is to help sell advertising, to help you watch the shows, to get eyeballs so they can sell ads and they can make money off of it. And kind of understanding that model helps you really see why they produce TV shows that way. But I can tell you that, like, the entire time I worked in the industry, as much fun as I had, it never really felt right. Kind of the way in which we were encouraged to not only get people to sign up to be on TV shows, but the way that you kind of like present them, or the way that you're, producing these TV shows around their stories, or around their real lived experiences that then present them to the rest of the world in a specific manner that they're then tied to for the rest of their lives. This
Mm.
was something that I always felt really uncomfortable with like these like shows that featured young children. I'm like, if a child is being presented as like this tiny pageant star, that is going to, it's one thing to be like featured in like, the local news and maybe your mom's photo wall and your like, trophy room. It's another thing to be on national TV as the like toddler tantrum pageant girl, right? And that story can carry with you for the rest of your life. So it never really sat right with me. And actually, a lot of people that I work with now at Make a Scene Media, we all work together in the television industry. In fact, my co-founder Heather Hutt and I worked at the same production company, and my VP, we all work together. So we all were having these conversations about maybe there's a different way. And so when we started our production company, we actually had the benefit, our very first project was with a domestic violence organization in Fairfax County.
Mm.
And my business partner, Heather, at the time was a volunteer for the organization. And they got a grant and they were like, hey, we need a PSA made. And we have a shoestring budget, but you do TV, so you could make us a PSA. And we were like, sure, we could figure this out. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, it felt like a really good opportunity. It was something that was really close to both of our hearts, obviously. But we were like, there's got to be a different way from the way that we used to do interviews, from the way that we used to kind of present these stories, and a way that really works with not only the mission, because what we needed to do with that PSA was to help people find the organization. Domestic violence rates were skyrocketing during COVID,
Yes.
and they needed to have a video that helped people not be scared to call the organization, and to feel good about working with them. And to also encourage maybe people who are in the other people who might see violence happening and be a friend to help lead others to get help, right? So it was like multi-platform audience.
So
Um,
can I jump in here just for a second? So what I'm hearing on this particular project is your big hearts, you were wanting to create this video for good, for
yes.
healing, for bridges, for, right? And you talked a little bit about sometimes storytelling can become sensationalized or people get trapped or frozen in one particular story. And so who better than you to really see the multidimensionality of everyone that's involved in creating the story and how that can have impact, sometimes unintended impact. So, sorry, just wanted to point out all these things because, yeah, you talked about safety versus sensationalism and how that plays out in making sure you're caring for the people in the project.
And I think even just like the nature of like sometimes the conditions under which we did television made it conditions unsafe on purpose, because you were able to get interviews out of people that become more emotional, right? They're just because there's a camera, there's just it's just you're taken out of um your feelings in that moment. And so when we worked on this project, we really wanted to kind of think through all of it, the safety element from scratch. Obviously, we weren't trauma trained or trauma, we didn't even know the words trauma informed necessarily, but we were working with an organization that had licensed social workers. There was therapists on staff. And so we went to them and we said, okay, can you help us think through this process and be more intentional to create the conditions of safety for the people sharing their story, and also for us as the people interviewing and the people that were going to be hearing the story and editing the story, to make sure that we're all being safe through this? Because what I also recognized when I was working on this project was I had spent an entire career chasing stories that were like open wounds in my own personal life, because I
Yes.
was right. So like I chased all of these stories of like kids and like, rough childhood and all this sort of stuff because I could relate really well to people who had that. but it was never allowing me to like fully, I was relating, but like trauma bonding in a way. Like it was that, right? Like people could open up to me for sure. But we were always leaving these moments like fully like re-engaged with our trauma. And I had my own, history as a child and growing up and stuff. Dynamic, I call myself, I had a dynamic childhood. Um, and so, I know, and so that was one thing I knew working on this domestic violence piece was that there might be an opportunity for my own trauma to resurface. And so I was very honest with the clients and I was like, how do we do this? How do we do this in a safe way for everybody? And so they taught us about being trauma informed. They taught us about SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health
Services Administration.
Services Administration, have a whole concept of how to be trauma informed, which we then took that concept and applied it to the stages of production. So
Oh
in production, we have three
my
stages.
Hold on. Hold on just a sec before we get into production. So I love this because I think most people thinking about the concept, and I love how you expanded it. This is not just for media,
Yeah.
right? This
No.
is about storytelling. And we all tell stories as humans on the planet. And we might be telling stories to lead our teams and our company. We might be telling stories to lead our family for connection with friends. You might be telling stories because it's part of your job in sales, in fundraising, right? It's not just nonprofits. It's what is happening here and are we using stories for connection, community, power, and healing, or are we unintentionally creating more harm? And I'm hearing your first project as a way that you slowed it down, got more empowered yourselves, and that you took it beyond. Because of course, when I first heard it, I thought, oh, it's the person telling the story, especially if the story has trauma to it. How do we take care of them? It's not just the person telling the story. It's everyone involved in the production of the story. And that feels really powerful in terms of how, or alignment with the whole by design mission, which is recognizing people, all people, as whole people, and that our human design is whole. And how do we work with it instead of against it? So you were going to talk about production. I just wanted to, you know, comment a little bit about how significant that is to think not just about the storyteller.
Well, no, that's again, thank you for pointing that out. That's usually an aha moment for people when I share that with them. When I'm like, I know that you think about the person sharing the story, but have you ever thought about that production assistant who is right out of college showing up on set, what their experience was? And maybe they haven't been briefed before they've shown up on set because they're the lowest paid person on the set. And nobody thinks to tell the PA what's happening, but maybe they have a lived experience that relates to what you're having a conversation about that day. So that's the one thing. But the other thing is too, is just talking about the power of stories. So
Mm.
our sort of little motto is that with great stories comes great responsibility, because I do think stories are our greatest asset. It's the number one currency that moves the world. It has overthrown regimes, it has overthrown monarchies, it has, changed dynasties. So I feel like stories are the
So
thing. They're
powerful,
so,
so powerful.
so powerful.
Yeah.
And I think that there's an ethical part to this conversation as well about the responsibility of those powerful stories and ethically what we can do with them. Because again, the Jerry Springer era, if anybody who is watching is from that age group, but basically this sort of idea of sensational media being the thing that people want because it's like, it's the most extreme versions of what you might have heard of. And so we love to hear about it, sort of like rubbernecking and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, is it responsible? Ultimately, are we teaching people anything or is it helping them?
Well, I was just thinking about an experience I had at a nonprofit organization. I went to like a fundraising luncheon and, they had their agenda, but there was a pretty significant moment where they had a member of their community come in and talk about their experience. And it was like really a lot and it was hard. And I know a lot of wallets opened up because that story was told, mine included, right? But it was hard to go through. I'm like crying, people are crying, everyone's crying all around this huge ballroom. And did they make money from it? For sure. How was it for the person? I don't know. How was it for me? Really hard for
Yeah.
a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
you
there's a
mentioned
limit to that.
sales, fundraising, the intention was the money going for good? For sure.
Yeah.
What's the balance of that? How do you, and I know you speak on this topic too, right? You give presentations about trauma-informed storytelling and trauma-informed media production. How do people know if if it tipped the scale towards healing or harm?
Well, here's the thing. The good news is it doesn't have to be healing or impactful. It doesn't have to be treating people with care or raise a lot of money. You can do both things. So that is the really exciting thing that we've discovered on that very first project with the domestic violence victims, where we employed our very first trauma-informed framework. Not only did all of those participants at the end of the process, when we implemented our trauma-informed framework, all the people who shared their stories, who were people who had all experienced trauma, said that the interview process, watching the story, was the was part of their, not only the final piece of their healing journey, because they felt like they were on the other side of the event that had happened to them and now they're helping people, but
Mhm.
like they felt empowered because they knew that this story was going to do something, that their story now wasn't just this bad thing in their life, it was empowerment to help other people.
Was a
That
catalyst
the
for change.
catalyst for other thing. One of
So
the people who participated went on to get her PhD in trauma informed work and is now doing trauma informed offices and employ like for business, right?
oh my gosh, I love her. I need an introduction. She needs to be
I
on the
told
podcast.
100%. I'm
I
going to
want
introduce her.
this
She's
out in the
amazing.
world, right? This is not just a therapy type of thing. This is about how you live your
You
life and
can
how
put
you,
it into every single
yeah.
work that you do. But the other thing was, this was the highest watched thing on all of their social media to this day. I think it's still one of the highest watched things that they've ever had on all of their social media. They won a
Mm.
matching
For
grant,
the DV organization. Wow.
which was their goal to get people in the door. They got a matching grant, which is more money. And then they got another grant 2 years later to do a teen version. So we were able to help that organization. And then now we employ that trauma-informed framework. We've had videos that have 1,000% ROI. An organization calls us up and said, "We just had a breakfast. We've never raised this much money at a breakfast
Oh my
before."
gosh, amazing.
I watched one do a gala just like you just talked about. We're all sitting around at tables, dressed up in fancy things. Guess what? We showed a video. Everyone's laughing, everyone's smiling, everyone feels good. Are there tears? Yes, but it's happy tears. They're like, "This is so great. I love it." And helping each other. It raised $250,000. So,
Amazing.
I
That's
mean,
the
it worked.
power. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the science.
Yeah.
This podcast is put on by Viva Partnership. We are an outpatient mental health practice, and we very specifically are employing the latest and greatest advanced therapeutic techniques that don't use words specifically. And there's a scientific reason. It's because of a part of the brain that gets engaged when we go beyond talk. It's actually part of what we say over and over again, that when you speak the right language, you get the right results, right? And you go beyond talk to begin healing. So you shared something about the power of video and the fact that it's so sensory. And in fact, one of the pivotal elements of the type of change that we support, because it's long lasting and it's permanent and it tends to be held by the nervous system in a significant way, hits our implicit memory, this place in the unconscious. And the main communication channel is sensory and visceral. So, yeah, tell me a little bit about that. Even the story you just told about watching the video, laughing, crying, appreciating the power and resiliency of the human system, the human experience, and how that plays a part in this trauma-informed storytelling and process.
Yeah, so I think that when people watch a video, there's so much happening at once. Not only are you actually seeing the person kind of relating to what their background looks like, where they are, where are they located, what are they wearing, all those sorts of things. I think for me, the more people see themselves and other people sharing their stories, or the more they can imagine themselves and other people sharing their stories, I think that's how the world gets to be a better place. Like my personal mission is to create this army of storytellers out there sharing their own individual stories, because I believe that that is the thing that helps people understand and truly relate to one another and truly say, like, I get you now and I understand where you're coming from in a way that maybe just reading their story or hearing somebody else tell it just doesn't make that connection. Somebody authentically sharing their own story and their own lived experience makes a big difference. And this is where the difference maker is too, because the word authentically sharing your story
Mhm.
can only happen when you feel safe while you are sharing your story. So I think people know when someone is sharing their story, that's either coming from a place of they're currently being triggered and their trauma has been activated. You can see it. That they're having a hard time thinking, they're jumping all over the place. They're maybe completely frozen. They're maybe just sobbing. There's all kinds of ways you can see that someone is not in their authentic body, in their authentic selves, sharing this moment
Mm,
in a way that it's full embodied self, right?
yes, that
People in trauma can share their story. It's not the same as when you're sharing it in a place that you're safe, right? So to me, that's the difference. It's like the difference between, I think, yeah, you can share very positive, wonderful storytelling that's very like, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then it was so great. But it doesn't feel embodied, right? Because there's a mask and there's a robot that's sharing it. Or we're really sharing a moment and you can feel it. And that's what I feel like opens up wallets more than anything else. More
yeah.
than anything else. You can be sharing a sad story or a happy story, but if it's shared with real intentionality and emotion and authenticity, that's the thing that moves people.
So, that made me, well, we're at the end of our time, so it's like a perfect segue into that juicy tidbit at the end. But that little thing made me think about authenticity versus like a performative kind of quality to it, the same as like safety versus sensationalism. It feels like little roadblocks, but you even said storytelling's so powerful. I hear you saying, let's do it. This is how we connect. This is how we move the world. This is how we heal and grow together. But I want to hear about these 4 R's so that I might know how I can be on the right side of the storytelling equation and not accidentally causing more harm. So let's hear it.
Yeah, because I think when you can do that, then you create those conditions where people are sharing their stories. You can use those stories again, that helps you raise money, helps you raise awareness, helps you do that thing that you need to do. Because I know that a lot of people who are watching this are out there doing some incredible work. And so my advice is just turn on the camera to your own work. Obviously, there's consent if you're ever filming other people and like letting people know, and we can talk about that. But for me, just go out, hit record, share your story, talk about your experience. But yeah, so the 4 R's, and again, I'm pulling these straight from SAMHSA. And then what we do is we put these 4 R's into our 3 stages of production, which is pre-production, which is all the planning and relationship building, production, which is the actual day of filming, and then post-production, which is the like editing and then the sharing and then everything that kind of comes beyond that. And so throughout those 3 stages, we're putting these 4 R's into place, which are realize, recognize, respond, and then resist. And so what that means is realize, it means that like everybody has trauma. We talked about that earlier. It's just recognizing that we live in a world where trauma is present, and therefore we should be aware of that, and that trauma could be anywhere. It could be not only with the person who's sharing their story, but the crew member who shows up. It could be the editor who's working on it. It could be the person in your finance department who, is just helping to do the invoicing, but has, is watching it cut. But like thinking through every person who might touch that project and say, hey, how can we potentially mitigate the trauma or somewhere where this might potentially hurt somebody? And
I
just
love that.
realize that it could happen in places you don't expect. I always think, we work with a lot of domestic violence, affordable housing, but then somebody reminded me the other day, yeah, what if you were doing a dog shelter and you just lost your dog, like a pet shelter? I was like, yeah, I didn't even think, like there's certain things like that you just don't even know. Recognize is the second R. So build the trust. Recognize that you don't know what to look for until you ask. So say, hey, we're going to be having a trauma-informed set. That means that if you feel unsafe, we want to know about it. And recognize that people feel safe when they're invited to tell you those sorts of things, that you start to build those conditions for safety.
Oh,
Um,
good.
and then
So
being
good.
able to respond to that, saying, hey, if somebody says, I don't feel comfortable on this, being like, that is okay. Because the third R is respond. So respond. So saying, hey, if we know this is going to be a very potentially sensitive conversation, we are going to say, hey, we're going to take breaks at these parts no matter what. We're going to have this on hand for breaks. We're going to do a morning meditation. We're going to have essential oils on hand. Whatever those things are that that person or you've decided as an organization or as a community that will create conditions of safety, having that present. And then finally, resisting re-traumatization is the fourth and I guess fifth R's, because that really just says look through all the processes and make sure where can we avoid trauma? How can we put those practices into place? How can we encourage people to speak up, do the groundwork, make sure there's consent at all places. But that's really how you can do that. And then I think, we've been doing that for the last 7 years and had a lot of success.
I think that is so amazing. I was writing them all down. I think they're amazing. As a trauma-informed center, Viva, we live by these, honestly, every single one of them. I mean, realizing is just a bigger awareness that trauma touches everyone's lives. Different traumas, different ways, but just seeing that and recognizing, I guess I should stay with realizing because that was the first one. Then recognize that just the invitation or the disclaimer builds trust. Asking preemptively can also build trust. Responding creates safety. Having a plan, knowing what to do, making it really felt that it's okay to have limits. It's okay to, take a break and having backup plans for that. And then the last one, resisting re-traumatization, is just this really proactive responsible way of engaging with all the different elements. I love it. I see it as such a careful, intentional practice. I know you speak on this topic all the time. So it was great to just scratch the tip of the iceberg with you and start to open minds about how this might be possible in a plethora of ways. Taylor, thank you so much for being here with us today. And thank you, listeners, for joining me on this episode of Whole by Design. I hope it left you feeling inspired to toss out the labels, embrace new perspectives, and take one step closer to the joy and clarity that is waiting for you. As always, visit www.vivapartnership.com to access our free and low cost resources that will empower you and your loved ones on health and well being. Let's spread the message. Subscribe, review, or share this episode with someone who could benefit from a stigma dropping approach to mental well being today.